Most people don't lose discipline because they are weak. They lose it because the system they rely on cannot hold their behavior when conditions change. That distinction matters more than motivation ever will. If discipline depended on feeling strong, it would collapse the moment you felt tired, bored, or distracted. If it depended on willpower, it would fail the first time life interfered. That is not a character flaw. That is a design problem. Discipline is not motivation. It is not intensity. It is not wanting something badly enough. Discipline is behavior that is locked tightly enough to happen even when you don't feel like doing it. When behavior is not locked, it leaks, it delays, it negotiates, and eventually, it stops. No matter how clear the goal is, this book is not here to make you feel inspired. It is here to remove the need for inspiration entirely. If you are done restarting, blaming, and hoping the next attempt will be different, what follows is not encouragement. It is structure. Chapter 1. The Cloud Problem. Most people do not quit because they do not want it badly enough. That is the lie they keep repeating to protect their ego. They quit because their goal never had a shape. It lived in their head as a feeling, an intention, an idea, a cloud, and a cloud cannot produce action. A cloud cannot be executed. A cloud cannot survive pressure. When the excitement fades, when resistance shows up, when life interrupts, a cloud disappears. That is why people disappear with it. There is a simple and brutal pattern. People start strong. They feel motivated. They tell themselves, this time is different. Then, about 13 days in, everything collapses. Not because the goal was wrong, not because they are lazy, not because they are weak, because nothing was ever locked into behavior. There was nothing concrete to hold on to when the feeling left. No written action, no clear command, no structure, just hope. And hope does not survive friction. A goal that exists only in your mind is not a goal. It is a wish. It feels real because you think about it often. It feels important because you talk about it. But when the time comes to act, there is no instruction, no start point, no clear move. So the brain does what it always does when it has no clear order. It delays. It negotiates. It looks for comfort. And then you tell yourself you will do it tomorrow. Tomorrow turns into next week. Next week turns into nothing. And you call it lack of discipline. It is not. It is lack of form. The cloud problem is simple. If your goal has no physical form, your behavior will never show up consistently. Your mind needs commands, not concepts. It needs something specific to execute, something written, something measurable, something tied to time. Without that, there is nothing to act on. You cannot execute a feeling. You cannot execute a desire. You cannot execute a vague idea of a better future. Execution requires clarity, and clarity does not happen in your head. It happens on paper. Look at how people talk about their goals. They say things like, I want to get in shape. I want to focus more. I want to build something. I want to be disciplined. None of these are actions. None of these tell you what to do today. None of these tell you what to do at 7 a.m. tomorrow when your alarm goes off and your body wants to stay in bed. These statements feel productive, but they are empty. They are clouds. And clouds never turn into movement on their own. When a goal is a cloud, The first thing that dies is execution. There is no clear trigger to act, no defined moment where action must begin. So action keeps getting postponed. Postponement turns into negotiation. Negotiation always ends in losing, because the moment you negotiate with your comfort, comfort wins. Every time. That is how discipline erodes without you even noticing. You do not collapse all at once. You drift. You delay. You let one small moment slide, then another. Then you miss a day. Then you tell yourself you already broke the streak, so it does not matter. And that is when people throw the entire system away. This is where most people completely misunderstand their failure. They think they failed because they slipped once. That is not what killed them. What killed them was that there was no system to return to, no written structure to re-enter, no clear next action when everything lives in your head. One mistake feels like total failure. There is nothing to anchor you back, so you reset. You quit. You promise to start again later. And later never comes. Here is the uncomfortable truth. There is no such thing as being not ready. There is only writing it down or not writing it down. Readiness is not a feeling. Readiness is a decision to give your goal a form that can be executed. The moment you write something down in clear behavioral terms, you are ready. The moment you refuse to write it down, you are hiding. You are protecting yourself from accountability. Because once it is written, it is real. Once it is real. You can no longer pretend. Thinking does not create movement. Intention does not create discipline. Motivation does not create consistency. Only behavior creates behavior. And behavior requires a clear input. If there is no input, there will be no output. Your brain is not broken. It is doing exactly what it is designed to do. It avoids effort when effort is not clearly defined. It resists pain when the reason is vague. It chooses comfort when the instruction is weak. That is not a character flaw. That is biology. The solution is not more hype. The solution is structure. This is the rule that changes everything. If it is not written, it does not exist. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not practically. It does not exist as something you can execute. A real goal is written. A real goal has verbs. A real goal has time. A real goal tells you exactly what to do and when to do it. Everything else is noise. Everything else is fantasy. Everything else is the cloud. You do not need a perfect plan. You do not need to see the entire path. You do not need clarity about the future. You need one thing. You need to remove the cloud. You need to take what is floating in your head and force it into something concrete. Something your body can act on without debate. The moment you do that, discipline stops being mysterious. It becomes mechanical. You show up because the instruction exists. You act because the command is clear. You stop relying on motivation because motivation is no longer required. This is where most people resist. Writing it down feels too simple, too obvious, too basic. They want something more advanced, something more inspiring, something that makes them feel powerful. But simplicity is exactly why it works. Writing removes ambiguity. Writing removes negotiation. Writing removes excuses. Once something is written, you either do it or you do not. There is no hiding from that, and that is why people avoid it. Not because it does not work, because it works too well. From this point forward, you need to adopt a new standard. You do not trust goals that live in your head. You do not trust feelings. You do not trust motivation. You only trust what is written and tied to behavior. If you cannot point to it on paper, it is not real. If you cannot tell yourself exactly what action is required today, your goal is still a cloud, and clouds always disappear under pressure. This chapter has one purpose: to end the cloud. Nothing more. Nothing less. Until you do that, nothing else in this book will matter. You can read every page. You can agree with every idea. You can feel inspired for a few days, and you will still quit. Because inspiration without structure always dies. Structure without inspiration survives every time. So here is the line. From now on, you stop lying to yourself. You stop pretending that thinking about something is the same as doing something. You stop calling vague intentions goals. You draw a hard boundary. If it is not written, it does not count. If it does not describe behavior, it is invalid. If it has no time attached, it is not actionable. That is the rule. No exceptions. Now you act. Not later. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Now, take a piece of paper. Write down one goal. 1, not 10. Write it in the form of an action. Write when it starts. Write what you will do. Write it so clearly that there is no room for interpretation, no room for negotiation, no room for escape. Do not decorate it. Do not explain it. Write it and stop. This is not about feeling good. This is about making your behavior real. The moment you write it down, the cloud is gone. And once the cloud is gone, action has somewhere to land. Chapter 2. The enemy is the noise. Most people do not lose discipline because they stop trying. They lose it because they let too many voices inside their head. They start with intention. They start with energy. They start with a clear sense that something needs to change. Then the noise shows up. Opinions, advice, reactions, questions, expectations. Suddenly, the simple act of doing what they decided to do becomes complicated. They hesitate. They adjust. They explain. They slow down. And without realizing it, their behavior loses weight. Noise does not attack your goal directly. It attacks your consistency. It pulls you into thinking when you should be acting. It invites doubt before your discipline has had time to harden. And once doubt enters, execution becomes optional. This is why noise is the real enemy in the early stages of discipline. Not laziness, not lack of desire. Noise. Noise is not just loud people or obvious distractions. Noise is anything that interferes with your ability to act cleanly on what you already decided. Noise is every comment that makes you second-guess your plan. Every conversation that pulls your attention away from your schedule. Every opinion that pressures you to soften your commitment. Noise does not tell you to quit. It tells you to reconsider. It tells you to balance. It tells you to slow down. It tells you to wait until things feel clearer. And that is exactly why it is dangerous. Because discipline does not die in one dramatic moment. It erodes quietly. One hesitation at a time. One adjustment at a time. One explanation at a time. In the beginning, your discipline is fragile. You do not have results yet. You do not have proof yet. You do not have momentum yet. All you have is a decision and a plan. That is not enough to survive constant interference. When too many voices have access to you, your mind shifts from execution mode into evaluation mode. You stop doing and start thinking. You stop moving and start comparing. You start asking questions you do not need answers to yet. You look for reassurance. You look for validation. You look for confirmation that you are doing the right thing. And every time you do that, you hand control of your behavior to something outside of you. That is how noise weakens discipline, not by force, but by permission. Most people think discipline is about being strong. It is not. Discipline is about being protected from unnecessary input, protected from constant reaction, protected from the urge to explain yourself. Discipline needs a quiet environment to grow. It needs simplicity. It needs repetition. It needs space to run without being interrupted. You do not build discipline by debating it. You build it by doing the same thing again and again without letting anything interfere. Noise makes that impossible. Noise turns every action into a negotiation, and once you are negotiating, you are already losing. One of the most dangerous forms of noise is the need to be understood. The moment you start explaining your goals to people who are not walking your path, you invite interference. They may not mean harm, they may care about you, but their words carry their own fears, limits, and priorities. They will project caution where you need pressure, comfort where you need structure, balance where you need force, and if you listen too closely, you will adjust your behavior to keep them comfortable. That is how commitment gets diluted. Not through opposition, but through concern. Not through criticism, but through advice. Discipline cannot survive that. Another form of noise is constant exposure. Too much information, too many perspectives, too many ideas. You read, you watch, you listen. And instead of acting, you keep consuming, you keep optimizing, you keep refining. You tell yourself you are preparing, but you are actually stalling. Noise feeds the illusion of progress without the cost of execution. It makes you feel engaged while keeping you inactive. Discipline does not need more input. It needs fewer interruptions. It needs you to stop listening long enough to act. There is a hard truth here that most people avoid. Discipline grows best in isolation, not permanent isolation, strategic isolation, early isolation, the kind where you reduce communication, reduce explanation, reduce exposure. You do not announce your plans. You do not debate your schedule. You do not seek approval. You execute quietly. This is not weakness. This is not fear. This is protection. You are not hiding. You are building. And building requires silence. You have to cut the need for consensus. Discipline does not require agreement. It requires action. The moment you need others to validate your choices, your behavior becomes unstable because validation is inconsistent. Opinions change, support fades, attention moves on. If your discipline depends on being understood, it will collapse the moment you are misunderstood. And you will be misunderstood. That is guaranteed. Not because you are wrong, but because most people are not willing to commit the way you are. Their reality is different. Their tolerance for discomfort is different. Their priorities are different. That does not make them enemies, but it does mean they cannot be your reference point. Noise also shows up internally. Overthinking, self-doubt, mental rehearsal, imagining outcomes instead of executing steps. This internal noise is amplified by external input. The more you listen, the louder your own hesitation becomes. You start questioning timing. You start questioning intensity. You start questioning yourself. That is not awareness. That is interference. Awareness sharpens action. Noise delays it. Learn the difference. Here is the rule that matters. If an interaction causes you to explain, justify, delay, or soften your next action, it is noise. It does not matter who it comes from. It does not matter how well-intentioned it is. If it interferes with execution, it does not belong in your environment. Discipline requires ruthless filtering, not anger, not confrontation, just distance. You do not argue with noise. You remove access. You simplify. You return to the schedule. You act. Understand this clearly. You are not required to defend your discipline. You are not required to explain your standards. You are not required to make your process comfortable for others. The only requirement is execution. The only proof that matters is behavior. And behavior only survives when it is not constantly being questioned. Most people lose momentum because they try to build discipline in public. They talk too much. They share too early. They expose unfinished habits to finished opinions, and the weight of that exposure slows them down. Discipline is not built through accountability to others. It is built through reliability to yourself. That requires quiet. That requires focus. That requires saying less and doing more. Noise wants access to your attention. Discipline requires ownership of it. You cannot give both what they want. You have to choose. Either you allow constant input and accept constant instability, or you reduce input and gain control. There is no middle ground. Every extra voice competes with your plan. Every unnecessary opinion weakens your follow-through. Every distraction pulls energy away from execution. If you want discipline to survive, you must protect it early. You must treat it like something fragile until it becomes automatic. That means fewer conversations, fewer explanations, fewer opinions, more repetition, more silence, more action. This is not antisocial. This is intentional. This is how discipline is formed. Once behavior is stable, noise loses its power. Once habits are set, opinions do not matter. Once momentum is real, distraction cannot stop you, but you do not start there. You earn that position by first cutting interference. You earn it by building in silence. This chapter exists for one reason: to remove external pressure before it erodes internal commitment. You are not behind. You are not weak. You are not failing. You are simply exposed, and exposure kills discipline. Close the door. Reduce the input. Protect your schedule. Protect your focus. Protect your behavior. The work does not need commentary. It needs repetition. In the next chapter, you will learn how to remove the last escape route, how to turn intention into something you cannot avoid. But none of that matters if noise is still inside your system. Silence comes first. Isolation comes first. Protection comes first. Then, discipline can do its job. Chapter 3. Anti-Cloud. Most people think they have goals. They talk about them. They think about them. They feel guilty about them. And then they wonder why nothing happens. The truth is simple and brutal. What they call a goal is not a goal. It is a cloud. It has no shape, no weight, no force. And because it has no shape, it produces no action. A cloud goal lives safely in your head, where it cannot demand anything from you. It cannot confront you. It cannot expose you. And most importantly, it cannot force you to move. As long as your goal stays in your head, your behavior will stay exactly where it is. A cloud goal sounds familiar. I want to be more disciplined. I want to get in better shape. I want to change my life. These statements feel serious. They feel meaningful. They feel like progress, but they are nothing. They contain no behavior. They contain no instruction. They contain no moment where action must occur. And the brain does not act on meaning. The brain acts on instruction. If there is no instruction, there is no execution. This is why people quit without understanding why. They think the problem is motivation. They think the problem is willpower. It is neither. The problem is that there was never a real goal in the first place. There was only a cloud. The mind is efficient. It looks for the easiest path that reduces discomfort. When a goal is vague, the mind has infinite room to delay, infinite room to negotiate, infinite room to postpone responsibility. A cloud goal allows you to feel like someone who has standards without forcing you to live up to them. It creates the illusion of seriousness while protecting you from action. That illusion is deadly, because it keeps you stuck while convincing you that you are trying. The anti-cloud principle exists to destroy that illusion. It does not motivate you. It does not inspire you. It removes your ability to hide. A real goal is not something you feel. A real goal is something you can execute. If you cannot act on it within the next 24 hours, it is not a goal. It is an idea. And ideas do not change lives. Actions do. Writing is the first line of separation between people who act and people who drift. When something stays in your head, it remains flexible. It can be reinterpreted, softened, delayed, forgotten. When you write it down, it becomes fixed. It becomes external. It becomes something you must now confront. Writing removes ambiguity. Writing creates friction. Writing turns intention into an object. And once it is an object, it can be worked on, measured, scheduled, executed, without writing. Nothing begins, not because you are incapable, but because there is nothing concrete to act on. Telling yourself that you remember your goals in your head is a lie. Memory does not create pressure. Memory does not demand consistency. Memory does not expose failure. Writing does. Writing creates a record. A line you crossed or did not cross. A decision you honored or avoided. That is why the mind resists it. Writing removes escape routes. It forces clarity. And clarity is uncomfortable because it immediately reveals the gap between who you say you are and what you actually do. Once the goal is written, it must be stripped of every vague word that allows negotiation. Words like try, aim, hope, and when I feel like it are not harmless. They are exits. They are permissions to fail without consequences. They are loopholes for the lazy part of the brain. A real goal uses language that leaves no room for interpretation. It does not suggest action. It commands it. I will. Not I want to. I do. Not I should. Language shapes behavior, and all the language creates soft action. A valid goal must contain a behavior, not an outcome, not an identity. A behavior. It must answer 4 questions clearly. What will you do? When will you do it? For how long? And where it will happen. If any of those are missing, the goal is incomplete. And an incomplete goal will fail under pressure. You do not rise to the level of your intentions. You fall to the level of your systems. And systems require clear inputs. Vague goals are unusable inputs. I will train is not a goal. I will train at 6 a.m. for 45 minutes in the gym is a goal. One produces nothing. The other produces a moment where you must either act or expose yourself. That exposure is the point. Discipline does not grow in comfort. It grows where excuses are no longer available. This is where most people feel resistance, not because it is difficult, but because it removes fantasy. A cloud goal allows you to imagine a better version of yourself without paying the price of becoming it. A concrete goal forces you to face reality. It forces you to see whether you are actually willing to do what you claim matters. Many people would rather keep the fantasy alive than risk discovering the truth. That choice is why their lives never change. Once a goal is written clearly, it stops being emotional. It becomes mechanical. It becomes an input to a system. This is critical. Discipline collapses when it depends on how you feel. A written, concrete goal does not care how you feel. It does not need motivation. It only needs execution. This is the shift, from desire to instruction, from hope to schedule, from identity talk to behavior. The moment a goal becomes specific, it automatically connects to planning. You cannot plan around a cloud, but you can plan around a behavior. This is why anti-cloud is non-negotiable. Without it, the next chapters do not work. There is nothing to plan, nothing to execute, nothing to recover. Everything that follows depends on this step being done correctly. Understand this clearly. Writing a goal is not productivity theater. It is not journaling. It is not reflection. It is the act of creating a command that your future self must obey. It is a contract between who you are now and who you claim you want to become. If you are unwilling to write it, you are unwilling to do it. There is no other interpretation. A cloud goal protects your ego. A concrete goal challenges it. One keeps you comfortable, the other forces growth. Discipline does not start when you feel ready. It starts when there is no longer anywhere to hide. Anti-cloud is the act of removing all hiding places. From this point forward, you do not get to say you have a goal unless it is written, specific, and executable. Anything else is noise. Anything else is self-deception. The world is full of people who want change and empty of people willing to define it clearly enough to act. Do not be one of them. This chapter does not ask you to believe anything. It does not ask you to feel inspired. It gives you a rule. If your goal cannot tell you exactly what to do next, it is not a goal. Fix it, write it, strip it down, lock it in, because discipline does not begin with strength. It begins with clarity, and clarity begins the moment the cloud disappears. Chapter 4. Daily Tactical Planning. If you do not write it down for tomorrow, it will not happen. Most people think they lack discipline. They don't. What they lack is a decision that has already been made before the day begins. They wake up and hope the day will go right. They hope they will feel focused. They hope they will feel motivated. And hope is exactly where discipline goes to die. If you leave your behavior undecided until the moment you are supposed to act, you have already lost, because in that moment, your brain does not care about your long-term goals. It cares about comfort. It cares about ease. It cares about escape. Discipline does not fail during execution. It fails the night before, when nothing was decided. Daily tactical planning exists for one reason only: to remove choice. It is not about thinking. It is not about reflecting. It is not about organizing your life. It is about locking your behavior in advance so that when the moment comes, there is nothing left to debate, no emotions to consult, no motivation to wait for, no negotiation. If it is written, it is done. If it is not written, it does not exist. Your brain is not designed to remember what matters. It is designed to respond to what is immediate. That is why good intentions vanish by morning. That is why people say they will train tomorrow, work tomorrow, start tomorrow. Tomorrow is not a plan. Tomorrow is a delay disguised as optimism. When you do not write down exactly what you will do tomorrow, your brain fills the gap with comfort. It fills it with distractions. It fills it with excuses that sound reasonable in the moment and destructive in the long run. Daily tactical planning is not weekly. It is not monthly. It is not a vision board. It does not care about what you want someday. It only cares about the next 24 hours. That is the unit of discipline, not the year, not the dream, the day. If you cannot control a single day, you will never control your life. And if you try to plan too far ahead, you give your brain room to escape. You overwhelm yourself. You drift. This system cuts that off. One day, one plan, one execution cycle. The plan must be written before you sleep. Not in the morning, not when the day has already started pulling at you. At night, when you are tired, when your willpower is low, when excuses are loud. You decide anyway. That decision is what protects you the next day, when you wake up. You do not ask yourself what you feel like doing. You already decided. Your job in the morning is not to think, it is to execute. Every action in your daily tactical plan must be specific. Vague actions are lies. Work on my goal is a lie, brain is a lie, be productive is a lie. Your brain cannot execute a concept. It can only execute a command. A command has a start time, an end time, and a clear action. 6 to 6:45 write 500 words. 1830 to 1915 train legs. 2100 to 2130 read 20 pages. That is not motivation. That is an order. You do not load your day with 10 priorities. That is not ambition. That is sabotage. You choose no more than 3 primary actions. 3. Not because you cannot do more, but because focus has weight. When you spread it thin, it loses force. More actions create more friction. More friction creates erosion. Erosion does not feel dramatic. It feels busy. And busy is how discipline dies slowly without you noticing. Once the plan is written, it is no longer a suggestion. It is a contract. You do not wake up and renegotiate it. You do not check how you feel. You do not adjust because the day feels harder than expected. Adjustments come later. Inside the recovery system. Not in the moment. In the moment. You execute because the decision was already made by a version of you who was thinking clearly. This is the psychological mechanism that makes the system work. When the decision is made in advance, your brain does not get a vote when the time comes. Negotiation is cut off. Willpower is preserved. You are not fighting yourself all day. You are following instructions. That is why disciplined people look calm. They are not constantly deciding. They decided once, and then they move. Daily. Tactical planning also builds something more important than productivity. It builds credibility with yourself. Every time you do what you wrote down, Your self-trust increases every time you skip planning. Even if you are busy, that trust erodes. Your brain learns whether your words mean anything over time. This becomes identity. You either become someone who does what is written or someone whose plans are optional. There is no middle ground. Most people fail here because they tell themselves harmless lies. I know what I need to do. No, you don't. If you did, you would do it. I'll see how tomorrow goes. That is surrender. I'll do it when I feel ready. That is waiting for motivation to save you. Motivation is not coming, and even if it does, it is unreliable. Discipline is built by systems, not moods. There is one non-negotiable rule in this chapter. No plan means no commitment. If you did not write it down, you are not allowed to pretend you were serious. And if you did write it down and failed to execute, you do not explain. You do not justify. You do not spiral. You log it and move to recovery. That comes later. The job of this chapter is simpler. Decide, write, execute tonight. You will write your plan for tomorrow. It does not need to be perfect. It does not need to be impressive. It needs to be clear. 3 actions, specific times, clear endpoints. That is it. Discipline does not live in your head. It lives on paper, and it only lives one day at a time. You do not build your future by thinking about it. You build it by deciding what happens tomorrow, before tomorrow arrives, and then refusing to negotiate when the moment comes. That is daily tactical planning. That is how discipline stops being an idea and becomes a behavior. Chapter 5. Execute or negotiate. There is a moment that decides almost everything. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. No one sees it. It happens quietly, inside your head, right at the point where an action is supposed to begin. You already know what you are supposed to do. You already planned it. You already said you would. And yet, in that exact moment, something small appears. A pause, a hesitation, a thought that sounds harmless. Not yet. In a few minutes. After I check one thing, that moment feels insignificant. But it is the moment where most systems die. Not because the action is hard, but because waiting feels reasonable. And that is the lie this chapter exists to destroy. Waiting is not neutral. Waiting is not rest. Waiting is not preparation. Waiting is the first move in a negotiation you are guaranteed to lose. The instant you do not act when the time arrives, your brain begins to evaluate. It scans for comfort. It looks for alternatives. It compares effort versus relief. And once that process starts, the original action is no longer in control. You think you are still deciding, but you are not. You handed control away the moment you paused. That is why execution fails so often, even when motivation is high. The problem is not that people do not want to act. The problem is that they give their brain permission to negotiate. Procrastination is usually described as laziness or lack of discipline. That description is wrong. Procrastination is not the absence of action. It is the presence of dialogue. It is the moment you start talking to yourself about whether you should act instead of simply acting. And once that dialogue opens, the outcome is predictable. Your brain is not designed to argue for long-term goals in moments of friction. It is designed to protect energy and seek immediate comfort, so every second you delay strengthens the wrong side of the argument. What begins as a small delay quickly turns into a justification. What turns into justification becomes a reason. And reasons, once accepted, become permission. There is a narrow window where action is possible without resistance. It is short, sometimes seconds, sometimes less. It exists right at the transition between planning and doing, if you move inside that window. Action feels almost automatic. If you miss it, action becomes heavy, complicated, and emotional. This is not a mindset issue, it is a mechanical one. The brain switches modes once the window closes, before the window. The plan is in charge, after the window. Emotions take over, and emotions do not care about your plan. Most people believe they can return to action later. They think the window will reopen. It rarely does. What usually happens instead is that the brain reframes the delay as a decision. I chose not to act right now. That reframing removes urgency. It creates a false sense of control. You feel like you are still in charge because you made a choice. But what you actually did was downgrade the priority of the action. From that point on, execution requires force, and force is unreliable. Execution only happens cleanly when there are no steps between the signal and the action. The moment you add a step, you add a chance to negotiate. Checking how you feel is a step. Preparing a little more is a step. Waiting for better conditions is a step. Each step is an invitation for doubt. Each invitation weakens the command. That is why people who prepare endlessly rarely execute. Preparation becomes a socially acceptable form of avoidance. It feels productive, but it delays the only thing that matters starting. The rule is simple, even if it is uncomfortable. When the time arrives, you act. You do not assess your energy. You do not check your mood. You do not evaluate whether today is optimal. You move, not because you feel ready, but because readiness is irrelevant. Action does not require confidence. It requires a trigger. The trigger is time. When time arrives, the action begins. That is the entire protocol. Gray areas are where systems collapse. I will do a lighter version. I will start slowly. I will just ease into it. These phrases sound responsible, but they are dangerous. They keep the negotiation alive. They allow the brain to stay involved at the moment it should be silent. At the point of execution, there are only two valid states: done or not done. Any middle ground creates ambiguity. Ambiguity creates debate. Debate kills momentum. This is why discipline cannot rely on feeling strong. Feelings fluctuate, conditions change, energy drops. If execution depends on internal states, it will fail under pressure. A reliable system removes internal states from the decision loop. You do not ask how you feel. You do not ask whether it will be perfect. You do not ask if you are in the mood. Those questions are irrelevant to execution. The only relevant question is whether the trigger occurred. If it did, the action follows. When action does not happen at the scheduled time, something important must occur. Not punishment, not self-criticism, not emotional analysis. What must occur is recognition. The system records a failure to execute, not as a moral flaw, but as data. Something in the design allowed negotiation to slip in. That is useful information. That information will matter later. But in the moment, there is nothing to discuss, no story to tell, no excuse to explain. The system moves on. This chapter is not asking you to push harder. It is asking you to remove the option to push at all. When execution is designed correctly, effort decreases, friction drops, action becomes boring, predictable, and repeatable. That is the goal, not intensity, not heroism, reliability. The strongest systems are not powered by emotion. They are powered by structure. If you notice resistance at the moment of action, that resistance is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that the negotiation door is still open. The solution is not to fight the resistance. Fighting creates more dialogue. The solution is to eliminate the door entirely. No discussion, no delay, no alternative paths. When the time comes, the action happens. That is all. Over time, something interesting occurs. The brain learns that negotiation is pointless. It stops offering it. Resistance fades, not because the work became easier, but because the rules became clear. Clarity reduces friction. Consistency reduces noise, and noise is the true enemy of execution. You are not failing because you lack discipline. You are failing because your system still allows debate at the worst possible moment. This chapter exists to end that debate. Once execution is locked to time instead of feeling, everything downstream stabilizes. Planning becomes meaningful. Recovery becomes possible. Ownership becomes real. But none of that works if execution remains optional. When it is time, you move. Not later, not after, not but once you feel ready. You move because the system says so, and the system does not negotiate. Chapter 6. Ownership is the fix. There comes a point where discipline breaks for a different reason, not because you stopped trying, not because you forgot what to do, but because life changed and your system did not. You had a plan. You followed it. You showed up. And for a while, it worked. Then the environment shifted. Pressure increased. Time got tighter. Energy dropped. And suddenly, the behavior you once executed without effort started slipping. This is where most systems die. Not at the start. At the pivot. This is the crossroads. Every time a bad result appears, you face a decision whether you notice it or not. You can blame, or you can take ownership. There is no third option. One path kills the system. The other keeps it alive. This chapter exists to lock that choice permanently. Blame feels natural. It feels justified. It feels intelligent. The schedule changed. Work got harder. Someone else messed things up. Conditions were unfair. All of that may be true. None of it matters. Because the moment you blame, something invisible but fatal happens. You give away control. You transfer power. The system no longer belongs to you. Blame is not a feeling. It is an action. It is the act of moving the cause of failure outside yourself. And when the cause lives outside, the fix lives outside too. That means there is no behavior to execute, no correction to apply, no adjustment to make. The system freezes. It waits. And anything that waits under pressure eventually collapses. This is the power exchange mechanism. When you say the reason is external, you are saying the solution is external. You may not say it out loud, but your behavior obeys it. You stop adjusting. You stop modifying the inputs. You stop reinforcing the structure. You stand still. And standing still is death for any system that depends on repetition. Ownership works in the opposite direction. Ownership does not ask who is at fault. Ownership asks who has the power to act. Ownership is the decision to keep all corrective authority inside yourself. No matter what caused the disruption, not because it is fair, because it works. Here is the reality most people avoid. Not every bad outcome is your fault, but every correction is your responsibility. The system does not care about fairness. It only responds to inputs. You can be right and still lose. You can be wrong and still fix it. The system does not respond to explanations. It responds to action, and only one person can provide that action. You. This is where confusion destroys discipline. People mix fault with responsibility. They think accepting responsibility means accepting blame. It does not. Responsibility means you accept the obligation to repair the system. Regardless of who caused the damage, fault is irrelevant. Responsibility is operational. One is a debate. The other is a command. A system operator understands this. A blame operator does not. A blame operator looks for causes and stops there. A system operator looks for weak points and moves immediately. When a bad result appears, the blame operator asks why this happened. The system operator asks what failed in the structure. This shift is everything, because the question determines the behavior. Asking why leads to thinking. Thinking leads to delay. Delay leads to drift. Asking what leads to action. Action leads to correction. Correction keeps the system alive. Ownership is not motivation. It is a reflex, a trained response. Bad result appears. No pause, no emotional processing, no debate. The only question allowed is which part of the system was insufficient. The schedule, the environment, the recovery mechanism. One of them failed. Identify it, strengthen it, move on. If you did not train, the problem is not your mood. The schedule was not forced enough. If you were late, the environment was not locked. If you quit midway, the recovery protocol was too slow. This is not philosophy. This is engineering. Systems fail at weak points. Strengthen the weak point or expect the same failure again. This is where freedom actually comes from. Not from feeling good, not from being understood. Freedom is the ability to correct your course without permission. Freedom is knowing that no failure can trap you because every failure triggers an action. You are no longer waiting for conditions to improve. You are improving the conditions. Ownership is the rule that every negative outcome must activate a predefined corrective behavior. Not reflection, not journaling, not self-talk. A physical adjustment to the system. Change the time, change the location, change the trigger, change the recovery step. Something concrete must move. If nothing changes, ownership did not happen. This rule is not optional. You are not allowed to stop at awareness. Awareness without action is disguised blame. You noticed the problem and did nothing. That is the same as transferring power away from yourself. The loop only closes when the fix is implemented. This is the declaration. From this point forward, every bad result becomes data, not drama, not identity. Data. Data points to a weakness. Weakness demands reinforcement. Reinforcement restores function. That is how the system survives impact. You are no longer allowed to say you tried your best and stop there. Effort without adjustment is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is whether the system changed after the failure. If it did not, you chose blame. If it did, you chose ownership. This chapter locks that standard. After this, there is no such thing as being stuck. There is only delayed correction. There is no such thing as failure. There is only unreinforced structure. Once you see it this way, quitting stops making sense. Why quit a system that can always be repaired? The system does not need you to be perfect. It needs you to be responsive. It needs you to act when results degrade. It needs you to treat failure as an instruction, not a verdict. When ownership is in place, collapse becomes impossible. The system bends, it adapts, it survives. This is the pivot. Before this chapter, discipline depended on conditions staying favorable. After this chapter, discipline survives change. That is the difference between something that works temporarily and something that lasts. From now on, you operate under one rule. Bad result equals immediate system adjustment. No delay, no explanation, no excuse. You do not move forward until the fix is in place. That is the price of sovereignty. Once this reflex is automatic, you are ready for pressure. Until then, you are not. This is the gate. Cross it or stay vulnerable. Ownership is the fix. Chapter 7. The Endurance Test. There is a moment in every serious pursuit where discipline is tested, not by chaos, but by silence. You are doing the right things. You are showing up. You are executing the plan. And still, nothing seems to move. No visible reward, no confirmation, no signal that tells you it is working. This is the moment most people misread. They think something is wrong. They think the system failed. They think the pain means stop. That misunderstanding is what ends the journey, not because the goal was wrong, but because the mind was never trained to survive this phase. This chapter exists for one reason: to keep the system running when your emotions try to shut it down. This is not about motivation. This is about endurance. This is the endurance test. The first failure always happens before the wall appears. It happens when the wall is not predicted, when you do not expect resistance. Your brain treats it as an emergency. Pressure rises, discomfort increases, fatigue sets in, and without a forecast, the mind assumes danger. It activates the escape response. It looks for relief. It searches for an exit. That is when behavior stops. Not because you are weak, but because your system was unprepared. You thought discipline was supposed to feel smoother than this. You thought progress would be clearer. You were wrong. The wall is not an exception. It is a default state. If you do not expect it, it will break you. If you do expect it, it loses its power. You must record this now. There will be a point where effort feels heavier than reward. That point is not random. It is guaranteed. It is not a sign to evaluate. It is not a signal to rethink the plan. It is a predictable phase of any long-term process. When you name it in advance, it stops being a surprise. When it stops being a surprise, it stops triggering panic. The wall does not mean you are off course. It means you are far enough along for the system to apply pressure. Expect it. Mark it. Treat it as a normal operating condition. This alone prevents most people from quitting. The second failure happens when difficulty is mistaken for misalignment. Pressure increases and the mind asks the wrong question. It asks, "Is this still right?" That question is poison at the wall. At this point, evaluation is not helpful. Evaluation weakens execution. The wall is not there to be judged. It is there to filter, under pressure. Weak behaviors fall away. Inconsistent behaviors collapse. Only behaviors with enough force continue. That is the function of the wall. It removes what cannot survive repetition. It does not tell you to stop. It tells you what is real. At the wall. There is only one metric that matters. Not results, not feelings, not clarity, only this. Did the behavior continue or not? If it continued, the system is alive. If it stopped, the system failed. Do not debate direction here. Do not analyze meaning. Do not ask if it is worth it. Worth is irrelevant. Continuation is the only criterion. This is how endurance is built, not by understanding the struggle, but by outlasting it. The third failure is emotional contamination. Pain and fatigue are allowed to speak at the wall. They should not. When sensations become inputs, behavior loses its structure. You start checking how you feel before you act. You start adjusting effort based on comfort. That turns discipline into preference. And preference is unstable. The system must be insulated from sensation. The schedule does not care how you feel. The plan does not consult your mood. When the time arrives, execution happens. No scan, no assessment, no internal negotiation. This is not suppression. This is separation. Feelings exist, but they do not vote. You must lock behavior to time, not to state. The body can be tired. The mind can resist. The action still happens. This is how the system remains coercive. The moment you allow feelings to participate, the wall wins, not because the pain is unbearable, but because the rules were never enforced. Discipline only works when execution is automatic. Automatic means independent of sensation. The fourth failure happens at the exact moment you want to stop, not after, not before. At that precise instant, quitting feels logical, reasonable, justified. That is the most dangerous second in the entire process. This is where most people break the chain. The solution is not inspiration. It is a preloaded reflex. The rule is simple. One more unit, one more repetition, one more page, one more minute. The unit must be defined in advance. Small, non-negotiable. When the stop signal fires, you do not decide. You execute the extra unit. That single action disrupts the command to quit. It keeps the system moving. It maintains rhythm. You are not trying to win the day at that moment. You are trying to prevent shutdown. The one more rule exists to bridge the gap between resistance and continuation. It does not require belief. It does not require strength. It requires compliance, and compliance is enough. One unit keeps the loop alive. One unit preserves momentum. This is how endurance compounds, not through heroic effort, but through refusal to fully stop. The fifth failure is the most destructive: sequence break. One missed action breaks the chain. The system loses its operating state, and without intervention, behavior does not automatically restart. This is where people reset. They take a break. They reassess. They wait to feel ready again. That is how systems die. Resetting feels clean, but it erases momentum. At the wall, resets are forbidden. There is no restart protocol here. There is only continuation. If a sequence breaks, you do not evaluate. You do not punish. You do not justify. You execute the next scheduled action immediately, without commentary. The chain is repaired by motion, not reflection. Reflection belongs later, at the wall. Movement is the priority. A broken sequence that is not immediately followed by action will not self-correct. It will decay. That decay feels subtle at first, then it becomes permanent. The rule is absolute. No reset. Next action only by the end of this chapter. The system must be different. The wall is no longer interpreted as a stop signal. Pain and fatigue no longer participate in decision-making. The one more reflex is installed. Sequence integrity is protected at all costs. This is not about pushing harder for results. This is about maintaining operational continuity when results are absent. That is endurance. Most people never fail because they lacked discipline. They fail because they lacked a protocol for this phase. They were prepared to start. They were prepared to execute. They were not prepared to wait without reward. They were not prepared to move forward without feedback. This chapter closes that gap. It replaces interpretation with procedure. It replaces emotion with structure. It replaces quitting with continuation. The endurance test does not care who you are. It arrives the same way for everyone. Quiet, heavy, unimpressive. If you survive it, you move forward. If you do not, the system collapses. There is no drama here, only mechanics, and now you have them. The next chapter will deal with the invisible phase that follows, but none of that matters if the system cannot stay alive here. Pass this test, keep the behavior running. Everything else comes later. Chapter 8. The Invisible Phase. There is a phase almost everyone reaches and almost no one understands. You are doing the work. You are showing up. The behavior is happening. And yet nothing seems to move. No signal, no reward, no visible proof. This is not a mistake. This is not a warning sign. This is the invisible phase. And this is where most systems die. Not because they are wrong, but because the person running them does not know how to interpret silence. The invisible phase begins the moment your behavior becomes correct, but your results have not caught up yet. You are consistent. You are following the plan. You are executing the actions exactly as designed. And the world stays quiet. No feedback, no confirmation, no external reinforcement. This silence triggers a dangerous reflex. The mind starts asking the wrong question. It asks, what if this is not working? And once that question appears, the system is already under threat. The common mistake is simple. People interpret, I do not see results yet as I must be doing something wrong. That interpretation feels logical. It feels responsible. It feels smart. But it is false. Lack of visible results does not mean incorrect behavior. It means you are early. The invisible phase is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that the system is still loading. Your brain does not like this phase. The brain is wired to look for reward signals. It wants confirmation that effort is paying off. When there is no signal, it assumes danger. It activates doubt. It starts scanning for alternatives. It pushes you toward change, adjustment, optimization, or abandonment. This is not insight. This is panic dressed up as analysis, and if you follow it, you will destroy a working system before it has time to produce output. Lag time is not a flaw. Lag time is the default condition of every meaningful process. There is always a gap between input and output. Action always comes first. Results always come later. If there were no lag time, discipline would not be required. You would only need impulse. The fact that discipline exists at all is proof that delay is built into reality. You must separate two timelines clearly. The moment behavior happens and the moment results appear are not the same moment. Confusing them is the fastest way to sabotage progress. When you lift a weight, the muscle does not grow in that instant. When you study, knowledge does not crystallize immediately. When you build a system, it does not pay off on demand. This delay is not punishment. It is how compounding works. The invisible phase exists because systems need repetition before they produce signal. One action does nothing. 2 actions do nothing. 10 actions still look like nothing. Then suddenly the output appears and people call it luck. It is not luck. It is delayed consequence. Those who quit during silence never reach it. Those who understand silence pass through. This is why behavior must be separated from results. Behavior is the only thing you are allowed to control. Results are not. The moment you use results as a steering wheel, you lose control. You start adjusting based on incomplete data. You start chasing feedback instead of executing inputs. You turn a stable system into a reactive one, and reactive systems collapse. A correct system does not ask, "Am I winning yet?" It asks, "Did I execute the behavior today?" That is the only valid question in the invisible phase. When results are allowed to decide whether behavior continues, discipline becomes conditional. And conditional discipline does not survive silence. During this phase, evaluation rules must change. You are not allowed to judge the system by outcome. You are only allowed to judge it by adherence. Did the behavior happen? Did it happen at the designed frequency? Did it happen without negotiation? If the answer is yes, the system is intact. Nothing else matters yet. This phase has one objective and one objective only. Hold the rhythm, not optimize, not expand, not accelerate. Hold the rhythm. The frequency you designed is the only thing that matters. Trying to improve during silence is a mistake. Adding new goals during silence is a mistake. Changing direction during silence is a mistake. Silence is not the time to think. Silence is the time to repeat. Many people misinterpret this phase as stagnation. It is not. It is compression. Pressure is building below the surface. Structure is forming where you cannot see it yet. The system is calibrating. Interrupting it resets the process. Every unnecessary change sends you back to the beginning. This is why new goals are forbidden during the invisible phase. New goals dilute signal. They split attention. They weaken consistency. You do not add weight to a bridge while it is still curing. You let it set. Discipline works the same way. Stability comes before expansion. Ways. The most dangerous reflex in this phase is the urge to quit quietly, not dramatically, quietly. One skipped day, one softened rule, one rationalized exception. The system does not collapse immediately. It erodes, and erosion is harder to detect than failure. You still feel like someone who is disciplined, but the behavior has lost its weight. By the time you notice, the habit is already weak. You must install a hard rule here. No system evaluation during the invisible phase. None. Every thought about changing direction, upgrading the plan, or questioning the approach is postponed, not debated, postponed. Until the first real result appears. This delay protects the system from premature destruction. It buys time for reality to respond. Quitting in this phase is not about being wrong. It is about being unable to tolerate silence. The mind wants noise. It wants confirmation. It wants reassurance. But discipline is not built on reassurance. It is built on repetition without feedback. That is the skill most people never develop. That is why they quit even when everything is working. This chapter does not ask you to do more. It does not add behavior. It removes a habit. The habit of judging too early. The habit of reacting to absence. The habit of letting emotion masquerade as logic. You are not allowed to change the system simply because nothing is happening yet. Nothing happening is exactly what should be happening. If you understand this phase, you become dangerous. You stop panicking when things are quiet. You stop negotiating when progress is invisible. You stop resetting systems that are about to pay off. You develop a calm that most people mistake for confidence. It is not confidence. It is understanding. This is the line that must be locked in. Correct behavior does not require immediate results. Silence is not failure. Silence is the cost of compounding. Those who can pay that cost win by default, because almost no one else will. If this principle is not locked, the next threat will destroy the system from the inside, not through quitting, but through slow erosion. That is what comes next. Chapter 9: Long-Term Erosion. Most people think discipline dies when you quit. That belief is wrong. Discipline rarely dies in a dramatic collapse. It dies quietly, slowly, without pain, without warning. That is why it is so dangerous. Collapse is obvious. Collapse hurts. Collapse shocks you awake. Erosion does not. Erosion lets you keep moving while you drift further away from the target every single day. You still show up. You still do things. But you are no longer going in a straight line. And because nothing feels broken, you do not fix anything. Until one day, you realize the system is empty. The discipline is gone. And you cannot point to the moment it happened. This chapter exists to stop that from happening. Erosion is not failure. Erosion is decay. It is the slow weakening of a system that is still technically running. Collapse is a hard stop. Erosion is a soft bleed. Collapse makes noise. Erosion is silent. That silence is what kills long-term discipline. Because your brain does not raise alarms for small deviations. It tolerates them. It normalizes them. It files them under harmless. And every time you allow a small deviation to pass without correction, you teach the system that precision is optional. This is the reality most people refuse to face. You do not lose discipline because you stop working. You lose discipline because you allow your focus to scatter. One extra task, one harmless distraction, one small exception. None of them destroy the system on their own, but they weaken the signal. They reduce the weight of the main objective. And over time, the behavior that once had priority becomes just one option among many. That is the beginning of the end. Erosion happens because of choice overload, not laziness. When motivation fades and the urgency disappears, the brain looks for novelty. It looks for relief. It looks for something new to stimulate it. And if you give it too many options, it will take them, not because you are weak, but because the system is unprotected. Discipline cannot survive unlimited choice. It needs constraint. It needs reduction. It needs a narrow channel where energy can move without leaking. This is where most systems fail. They assume that as long as you are doing something, you are fine. You are not. Movement without direction is drift. Activity without priority is erosion. Being busy is not the same as being aligned, and alignment does not happen by accident. It has to be enforced. There is no neutral action. That is the truth most people try to avoid. There is no middle ground, no harmless filler, no action that doesn't really matter. Every action either feeds the target or feeds distraction. If it does not strengthen the primary objective, it weakens it, even if it feels productive, even if it feels justified, even if it feels small. The system does not care how it feels. It only cares about direction. This is why the binary test exists. Before every action, there are only two questions. Does this feed the target, or does this feed distraction? There is no third option, no gray zone, no exception for comfort. If the action feeds the target, it stays. If it feeds distraction, it goes immediately. No delay, no debate, no rationalization. Most people resist this because they want flexibility. They want freedom. They want to believe they can manage multiple priorities without cost. They cannot, not over the long term, because every extra priority steals weight from the main one. And when weight is lost, discipline fades, not instantly, gradually, quietly, until execution becomes optional, until focus feels forced, until the system no longer pulls you forward. Isolation is not punishment, it is protection. When you enter a phase of long-term focus, not every input is allowed, not every activity is welcome, not every distraction is harmless. You do not ask whether something is fun or relaxing. You ask whether it belongs. If it does not serve the target, it does not enter the system. This is not about being extreme. It is about being precise. Precision is what keeps erosion from spreading. You must create a list of forbidden actions during your focus phase, not because they are evil, but because they dilute attention, because they introduce noise, because they pull energy sideways. This list is not emotional. It is mechanical. If the action does not move the objective forward, it is cut automatically. No guilt, no explanation. The long-term lock is simple and unforgiving. One day serves one objective, not 10, not 5, 1. That objective sets the hierarchy. Everything else obeys it or is removed. You do not balance priorities, you rank them, and only the highest one gets authority over your day. This is how behavior gains weight. This is how discipline stays alive long after motivation disappears. Discipline does not survive on feelings. It survives on mass, on repetition, on direction held consistently over time. When you split your energy, you reduce mass. When you allow exceptions, you leak force. When you tolerate distraction, you weaken the system, and the system does not recover on its own. It only recovers when you correct deviations early, when they are small, before they become normal. That is the mistake most people make. They wait for a big problem before acting, but then the erosion is complete. The system is hollow. The habits are loose. The standards are soft. This chapter removes that delay. Every deviation is treated as a system error, not an emotional failure, not a moral flaw, a mechanical issue that requires immediate correction. After this chapter, there is no excuse for drift. Before every action, you apply the binary test, feed the target, or feed distraction. If it feeds the target, execute without hesitation. If it feeds distraction, remove it immediately. No postponement, no compromise, no negotiation. This is not about willpower, it is about design. Discipline does not die because you quit. It dies because you let it dissolve into fragments. It dies because you allowed too many directions, too many inputs, too many exceptions. This chapter locks that door. One target, one direction, one standard. held day after day without dilution. This is how you protect discipline over the long term, not by intensity, not by emotion, but by ruthless clarity, by refusing to allow erosion to take root, by cutting distractions before they feel dangerous, by choosing alignment over variety every single day. There is no neutral action. Remember that. There is only movement toward the target or movement away from it. Choose accordingly, and remove everything else without delay. Chapter 10. Failure Recovery System. Failure is not the exception, it is the default. If a system runs long enough, it will fail, not once, many times. Anyone who believes otherwise is not running a system. They are living inside a short burst of motivation and hoping it lasts. This chapter exists to close the loop, to remove the final escape hatch, to make sure the system stands back up before you even have time to decide whether you want to quit. Most people quit not because they do not care, but because they misunderstand what a fall means. They see a missed action and immediately translate it into a verdict about themselves. Weak, undisciplined, back to zero. That interpretation is what destroys everything. The fall itself is not the problem. The meaning assigned to it is. When a fall is treated as failure, the system collapses. When a fall is treated as data, the system adapts. This chapter forces that shift. A fall is not a rare event. It is not a surprise. It is not a sign that something went wrong. A fall is a state that will occur in every system that operates long enough. Energy fluctuates, environments change, life interferes. Pretending otherwise does not make a system stronger. It makes it fragile. A strong system plans for the fall in advance. It expects it. It builds around it. From this point forward, every time an action does not happen as planned, it is automatically classified as a fall. No interpretation, no story, no emotional framing, just a state change. The most dangerous response to a fall is reset. Reset feels clean. Reset feels responsible. Reset feels like starting fresh. But reset is a design flaw, not a solution. Reset erases accumulated momentum. Reset deletes behavioral data. Reset convinces you that discipline lives in perfect streaks instead of continuity. Every reset trains the brain to associate imperfection with abandonment. Over time, that association becomes automatic. One miss turns into total collapse. This chapter removes reset entirely. The system does not restart. It continues to a fall. Most people turn inward. They analyze how they feel. They ask why they lost motivation. They search for emotional clarity before acting again. That process feels thoughtful, but it is useless. Emotions do not contain repair instructions. They do not tell you what to change. They only describe how the fall felt. This system does not evaluate feelings. It evaluates mechanics. Only behavior and structure produce usable data. Everything else is noise. When a fall occurs, the response is immediate and mechanical. A system check is triggered. There are only two questions. Not more, not less. What action did not happen? What mechanism allowed it to fail? These questions are not philosophical. They are operational. They strip the event down to facts. An action failed. A design element was insufficient. That is all. No blame, no defense, no explanation required. The next step is critical. Most people attempt to fix everything at once. They overhaul routines, they redesign plans, they add rules. That impulse feels proactive, but it is destructive. Large changes create delay. Delay opens the door to negotiation. Negotiation leads back to paralysis. This system forbids large fixes in moments of failure. Only one adjustment is allowed. One small change. The smallest possible change that increases constraint. Nothing more. That change must belong to one of three categories: timing, environment, enforcement. The schedule may need tightening. The environment may need friction removed or added. The level of constraint may need to increase slightly. One change, applied immediately. No optimization, no improvement, just enough to restart movement. Then the system moves forward, not backward, not to the missed action, to the next scheduled action. There is no waiting period, no recovery day, no tomorrow I will restart properly. Rest creates space. Space invites doubt. Doubt invites exit. This system does not pause, it advances. Momentum is preserved by continuity, not perfection. At this point, the definition of a fall must change permanently. A fall is not a stop signal. It is not evidence that the system is broken. It is evidence that the system is working long enough to reveal weak points. Every fall produces two outputs, one data point, one adjustment. If a fall produces nothing, it was wasted. This system does not allow wasted falls. Over time, this process rewires your relationship with failure. The emotional charge fades. The drama disappears. A fall becomes routine, predictable, manageable. It loses its power to derail, not because you became tougher, but because the structure absorbed the shock. That is what strong systems do. They do not rely on resilience. They rely on design. The final lock is the recovery flow itself. After a fall, there is no choice tree, no options to consider, no debate about what to do next. The sequence is fixed, fall detected, system check performed, one adjustment applied, next action executed, end, no deviation, no alternative routes. The absence of choice is the protection. Choice is where quitting enters. By the time this chapter ends, quitting should feel foreign, not forbidden, just unnecessary. The system does not need your permission to continue. It continues by default. You do not need to feel motivated. You do not need to feel strong. You do not need to feel ready. The structure carries you forward even when you are quiet inside. This is what makes discipline durable. Not intensity, not inspiration, not willpower. Durability comes from the ability to absorb disruption without collapsing, from the ability to fall and move on without ceremony, from the refusal to dramatize what is normal. You will fall again. That is guaranteed. When you do, nothing about your identity changes, nothing about your direction changes. The system registers the event, corrects a flaw, and proceeds. No reset, no pause, no negotiation. The loop is closed. At the end of this system, discipline no longer feels like something you summon. It feels like something that runs. It exists outside your moods, outside your opinions, outside your doubts. It does not ask how you feel. It does not care if today is hard. It moves because it was designed to move. And that is the point.